Mark Sleboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay today?
Jamarl, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
I'm alive. I'm safe.
Is that Jamarl?
That is Jamarl indeed.
I just didn't know who that fresh baby-faced guy was.
I shaved it off. I was like, where to go? You know what's wild? When I did the first cut and all the hair for to the sling, I was like, I'm gonna miss that hair. I actually grew accustomed to it. I was like, all right, this beard, this is my homeless beard, right? I was like, time for me to shave my homeless beard. I need to shave it. It's getting too extreme.
I think if I tried to shave it, my skin would come off, but the beard would remain.
Your beard is fantastic, Mark. You should keep it. It's a manly thing to have a beard.
It's showing my age.
Let me ask you this: 12 hours of negotiations, and up to this point, I have not seen a statement come out of Kremlin or Washington. I've seen comments that are being made, but no communique. I was looking for the communique. I was curious on what they were going to say. What is your estimation of these talks?
Nothing burger. Nothing burger, right? I mean, it's been the same opinions I had since before these talks, but absolutely nothing in the previous round of talks and the one before that and this round of talks. And nothing I've seen. It was very interesting. There was a statement made during a break by the U.S. side, I believe, yesterday that, well, it's not important that a document comes out of every negotiations. It's important that we're talking and we're understanding each other, which is to say that, there's no agreement. We accomplished nothing. The one comments I've seen out of the Russian side was difficult but useful dialogue, right? Mm-hmm. Which is to say that there was absolutely no agreement on anything whatsoever. Basically they're burying this, but I mean, maybe appropriately so, as this latest round of talks was about technical details. It was technical in nature, right? So very limited, right? This was to focus on some form of agreed ceasefire in the Black Sea that was frequently being referred to as, at least on the Russian side, as some type of abomination resurrection of the Black Sea Initiative, or the grain deal, as it was called previously. And of course, beside the talks themselves, the technical details, it's rather interesting on who was attending, right? And on the Russian side, Karasin is a sitting senator in the Federation Council. He's head of the Foreign Relations Committee. And the other person representing Russia was Beseda, whom is a former deputy director of the FSB, retired. He is the director of a department within the FSB. He is also still an advisor to the sitting FSB, head of the FSB. Now Beseda is somewhat of an expert on Ukraine. In fact, there's a whole toxic sea of mostly false rumors previously about Beseda, about his involvement in Ukraine. He's somewhat of a Ukraine expert, and I think he can best be described as extremely hostile to the Maidan regime. He was reportedly actually in Ukraine when the West-backed Maidan putsch overthrew the Ukrainian government. And he had been pushing or making the argument for a long time that Russia should have intervened earlier than what they did, which is something that I was arguing about from 2014 onward as well. There's been a whole lot of rumors that he was sidelined, that he was imprisoned, that 150 FSB people were demoted because of his wrong analysis or something like that. And all of that has been proven to be false. He retained his position, and this was admitted quietly later by both U.S. intelligence and, by the way, the Kiev regime's military intelligence chief, the genocidal sociopath Kyrylo I like the dark Budanov. But yeah, they both admitted that, that was all nonsense. Beseda was still in place. He retired in a couple of years. He is quite old, but he retained a position as an advisor to the FSB director, like on hot dial if they've got serious issues. And now he's been brought back to negotiate on the Russian side. And I think we can be safe to assume that he is extremely knowledgeable about Ukraine and will be extremely tough in negotiations. But these are both, they're not minister level people, right? Notice that, right? This is people, unless you have been paying minute attention to Russian events, these are names that have probably passed over your, who are these guys? Right? Same thing on the U.S. side. We have a representative of U.S. State Department, state planning, right? These are not high-ranking officials. Now, the Kiev regime also had a team,
yes,
right,
they did.
in Saudi Arabia for these talks.
Yes,
and that was headed up by the Kiev regime's defense chief, Rustem Umarov, right? So they sent minister level people. Now, there was never any time where the Russians or Ukrainians met each other, right? The U.S. is trying to play this as if they are some type of mediator, rather than the patron of the losing side of this conflict, which is rather interesting. And Russia seems to be playing along more out of interest and curiosity than anything else at this point. But it's still often billed as that these are Russian-U.S. negotiations. The word bilateral has popped up in a undeniable number of times that you can't ignore it, that this is a negotiation between the U.S. and Russia. Yeah. And
but they are.
I mean,
wait, real quick, Mark. But they are. I guess my point is, yes, I get it, right? Ukraine and Russia are having a war. Who is funding? Who's giving weapons? Who's giving money? Who's giving support? Like, at a certain point, even Rubio said, this is a proxy war.
This is a proxy war. Exactly. I mean, if the U.S. Secretary of State says that, you can't really, however much that may not be the way that your narrative has depicted this conflict, and the media is very loath to acknowledge that. Even the Trump administration, at the highest level, has admitted that at this point. So, but that does not necessarily mean that Trump's leash on Zelensky is in firm control of this beast, this monster, as they thought or as they would like it to be. So the Ukrainians still have to be involved at some level, and however grudging, their acceptance must be forced out of them, right? I mean, but here's the problem, because we already know, although, again, this is not being reported in the Western media, but the first partial ceasefire, right? The ceasefire against energy infrastructure is already broken, right? Multiple times. The Kiev regime has attacked Russian energy infrastructure almost every day since there was an agreement. We don't know actually when the agreement came into force. We don't know, because it came into force, Russia, minute after talking with Trump. In fact, Putin ordered the shooting down of several drones, right, with air defense and air power that were on locked courses, remotely operated drones towards energy infrastructure in Ukraine. They had to be shot down. And there have been no Russian attacks on the Kiev regime's energy infrastructure since that agreement with Trump, right? Now, there have been lots of other attacks. There was a huge drone attack over the weekend on Kiev, on Odessa, and elsewhere, right? But not against energy infrastructure. The Kiev regime, on the other hand, has blown up the major terminal in Suja, causing very substantial damage, it must be said, on that pipeline that had been bringing gas to Europe, to Slovakia, to Hungary, and the like. And the damage is so bad that the estimates out of Russia is that even if repairs were to be attempted, that they would take 2.5 years.
Are you serious?
Yes. All right. And there have been several attacks since then. Some of them, again, one of them causing very dramatic fires, another one being stopped by air defense just prior to impact. But they've been attacking every day. I mean, it's not something even that you can say is some rogue elements. Now, it must be said that the Kiev regime is not admitting to any of this, right? When responding to the attack on the Suja terminal, they fall back on the Russians blew up their own shit again. I mean, that's where we are. Just like with the attack on the Crimean Bridge, the Nord Stream pipelines, the artillery attacks for a decade on the Donbass. Oh, it's those crazy pro-Russians shelling themselves, right? Or the hundreds of assassinations of the leaders of the Donbass, militia leaders, political leaders, activists, anyone in eastern Ukraine, officials at all levels who has been opposed to the Maidan regime. It was all, this is infighting among the militias, or the Russian FSB is cleaning house. That was the narrative for years. And it was only in the last 2 years it's been admitted to, right? In interviews in the Western media, Budanov, the Kiev regime's military intelligence chief, the one who likes the dark, he openly admitted, yeah, that was us. We assassinated all of these people. We had a very extensive assassination. So at each one of these, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? It's always those Russians doing it themselves. And usually the Western mainstream media just reports that uncritically because they're nothing but rote propagandists, right? Now, later, they're often forced to quietly retract those things when the U.S. government or the Kiev regime side at some point, months or years later, admits to it, right? And no one really believes, right, that Russia blew up this gas terminal in Suja, right? I mean, but no one is going to challenge the Kiev regime on it either because they're good little propagandists, right? So until they receive something official from their own government, then they have to pretend to play along. So Russia has acknowledged that these violations are occurring, but they're once again playing the trusting fools, and they're not responding in kind. They've reserved the right to, but they're going through the motions, I guess, of showing willingness or whatever you want to have it to Trump, right? Which I think is
a bad idea,
futile and stupid and self-defeating. And there's a lot of criticism within Russia, right? From the war hawk side, right? That what is going on here, right? Now, it has to be said that there isn't a whole lot of belief that Putin is about to sell the SMO out, right? That in fact, there is quite a great deal of evidence on the other side. Last week, Putin appeared at an annual summit, a meeting of the heads of the industrialists and entrepreneurs. It's like a meeting of the American Chamber of Commerce, more or less, right? That's an idea. Top business in industry and business from across Russia. And he spoke in a closed meeting to them, right? And it seems that he talked mostly about what was going on in Ukraine. And of course, I believe that this was said with the full knowledge that it would then be reported back. And that's how he chose to do it. But he made clear that these were going to be extremely difficult negotiations, that they were going to last a long time, that there was very little chance of them achieving anything in the end, that the Russian business leaders and entrepreneurs, industrialists should be prepared that the sanctions will be in effect for the foreseeable future, like decades, that is not going to change, even if some type of deal was reached. Considering the U.S. history with removing sanctions. I mean, the one that's always brought up, of course, is the Jackson-Vanik sanctions leveled on the Soviet Union were only removed against Russia, more than 20 years after the Soviet Union dissolved itself. And even then, they were replaced within a few months by the Magnitsky Act sanctions, which did just about the same thing. So, unfortunately, most of these sanctions, even if they were to be removed, let's say that you believe that the Trump administration was genuine, most of them still have to go through Congress, and Congress is hostile to this, right? And most of them would require a 2/3 majority, right, for the Senate to revoke them. So, it's not going to happen, right? And the Russian government is very realistic about this. But what's more is he made clear that in negotiations, Russia was going to demand not stick by their claims, right? Under the Russian Constitution, right, as it has been changed, that not only Crimea, but Donetsk, Lugansk, and the entirety of Kherson and Zaporozhia, even those still areas of it still outside of Russia control, must, right, be part of Russia. As not only that, but that both the Kiev regime and the U.S. must acknowledge that they are part of Russia, right? Which is saying, tantamount to saying, there will be no peace deal, right? And he went further and said that if they do not agree to this in a short period of time, that Russia will then extend their claims to Odessa, Kharkov, and basically what he's saying is the entirety of the east bank of the Dnieper. Right.
I mean, keep in mind, though, all of this is taking place as the Russian military continues to move.
Yes.
And so it's not like, okay, we have a ceasefire and we're negotiating. We're negotiating.
There is no ceasefire that is affecting military operations at all.
No. I'm saying this is not a case where Trump is like, okay, we got a ceasefire and we're negotiating. We're negotiating while we continue to move westward. So, truth be told, they could take that territory while they are still negotiating.
Sure.
In which case,
it will be a very long time. We're talking more than a year, more than likely, right? I mean, if we're talking Zaporozhia City and Kherson City at a minimum, right? Before we even start talking about cities like Odessa, right? And Kharkov. But these are all big cities, right? Big cities, millions of people. And Russia has not taken any cities of that size thus far in this conflict, right? Donetsk and Lugansk City, the biggest cities in those regions, were already, right, in DNR, LNR hands when these conflicts began. And the next biggest cities, right, that have been taken, Mariupol, Bakhmut, and others, these have all been cities a maximum of 200,000 people, right? And everything else has been towns and villages, small cities, towns and villages. There has not been an armed taking or any other kind of taking of cities the size of Kherson City, which Russia withdrew from, right? Kherson City surrendered to Russia as that entire region, the whole South did, right? They just went over to the Russian side. There was very little fighting in the beginning of the conflict when Russia went in the intervention in 2022. And their militaries were largely stood down, right? There was penetration of the military, the political, the intelligence elites, and they were happy to stand down. It didn't happen everywhere in the country, but it did happen in the South, in Kherson and Zaporozhia. And when Russia withdrew from Kherson City, then to a lot of internal criticism, there wasn't a fight. There wasn't a fight for the city itself, right? So there hasn't been a big city assault like that thus far in this conflict, right? And that's gonna, no matter what, there's a general idea that this is just about over. And that's not what is happening on the battleground, right? Yes, in local locations like in Suja, in Kursk, Russia achieved a dramatic victory, in part due to a special operation, in part due to a couple months worth of strangulation of the Kiev regime supply lines into Suja. It all happened very quickly. There was a crumbling. There was, a rout. There were prisoners taken, right? It's still ongoing. But it is not like the Kiev regime is completely military, right? Is completely crumbling everywhere else on the battlefield. They are currently launching an offensive into the Belgorod region. Right. In fact, it is possible that they will take their first town.
Go into it, because I saw that and I wasn't sure the seriousness of it.
It's fairly serious, right? So Russia repelled the first 2 or 3 days of initial assaults that were, we're talking 200, 300 people and equipment, right? Doing extreme damage to equipment, but Zelensky keeps throwing reinforcements into this, right? They haven't taken anything but during the first 2 or 3 days. They didn't take anything but tree lines across the border and that sort of thing. They were mostly their equipment destroyed, driven back, but they've been throwing so much, that they're achieving a certain amount of tactical success just through momentum. They're not counting lives or equipment lost, right? Because they're fighting the narrative war here. They need a chunk of Russian territory because that's where Zelensky's mentality is, right? So they're not counting costs. They blew up a bridge across a small local river to which the Russian forces defending Demidovka were reliant on. Now, presumably, they will try to put up pontoon bridges and so forth as a replacement. But this will put the Russian forces defending, at least under temporary stress, for supplies. And it is likely that the Kiev regime could use this to surge forward. We're not talking, huge number. We're not talking thousands of people, but there are hundreds of people fighting on both sides. And what's more, Russia, the Kiev regime, by reports, it must be said by the Kiev regime side, but these have been echoed by Russian unofficial sources, right? The war correspondents, the Telegrams journal. Russia was using helicopter gunships to do a lot of damage to the vehicles that the Kiev regime was sending here. But evidently, this already happened 2 days ago, I believe. They detected, they got some intelligence of where these helicopters were being landed, being based, refueled, resupplied out of, and they hit it with HIMARS. And they destroyed it, according to reports, again, which are not verified, but seem credible because enough people on the Russian side unofficially seem to have acknowledged it. They wiped out 4 helicopter gunships, which is no small, it's not going to cripple the Russian side or anything, but you take out 4 helicopters and one shot, that's a success, right? Yeah. And again, it has to be noted that it has been admitted years ago now in reporting in the New York Times that every single HIMARS shot receives its coordinates from U.S. officials, right? Every single HIMARS shot, not just the ATACMS, but every single one, because HIMARS is guided by satellites, right? So that means the U.S. had to be involved, meaning the Trump administration, because this is now the Trump administration's war, right? So they're, again, big cost, right? This is all being very quiet on both sides now because the Russian side doesn't want to admit that its mainland is under attack again, right? so soon after recovering Suja and most of the Kursk incursion zone. And the Kiev side doesn't want to admit anything until they've got something that they can claim as a success, at least that first village, right? Demidovka. So it's happening very quietly, but this is happening. And the Kiev regime is launching counterattacks in multiple other areas on the front, right? Always with a high cost, right? But the beast isn't done yet, right? I mean, there is still heavy, intense fighting going on, right? In the Kupiansk area, they're trying to push back Russian forces bridgehead across the Oskol. They're throwing a lot of forces into that. There continue to be counterattacks south of Pokrovsk and in other areas in the Toretsk environs and so forth. So there's still a lot of heavy fighting going on. Biden pumped them full of a lot of weapons, right? The European Union, by all accounts, even if you leave their ridiculous rhetoric of 800 billion and all of that on the floor, does seem to be upping their game a bit. And it has to be said that armaments from the U.S. are continuing, right? Trump hasn't signed off on any new arms packages, but a significant portion, right, of the previous arms packages under the Biden administration going back years have been for production, right? Not drawn out of the Pentagon stock, right? About maybe half of it was, maybe a little more than half, but a lot of it was contracts to the U.S. military industrial complex because they were already out of stuff on the shelves, right? They had already all of the disposable shells, all of, wouldn't cut into the Pentagon's minimum levels of storage, right, were already exhausted. So they started doing direct contracts with the U.S. military. And all those contracts are still valid. So there is always a certain amount of shells and equipment and munitions and everything else that is being supplied to the Kiev regime on a regular basis, right? It's nowhere near what Russia has been producing and providing to their military forces. That's long been admitted. But it is certainly enough to keep this fighting going on for a very long time.
Yeah.
And